Hello, this is Joe Polish, president of Piranha Marketing and founder of the Genius Network interview series, and you're about to hear one of my Genius Network interviews, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope you find it very useful. If you want to find out more information about some of the interviews and resources that can help you in your business, you can go to www.joepolish.com. And we have a Joe Polish Recommends section with all kinds of resources and vendors and services and products that we recommend that can help you in your business. And also for more useful interviews and a whole list of other people that I've interviewed, you can go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks and enjoy the interview. Hello, this is Joe Polish, founder of Piranha Marketing and the Genius Network. And I want to welcome everyone to this very special interview and conversation that I'm doing with Tim Ferriss. Now, his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, has created literally a revolution in the way that people do work and think about work in the modern world. And I want everyone to know that what we're doing right now, for those of you that are listening to us live, is we're actually creating a recording, a training. We're documenting what Tim knows and some of his wisdom, and I'm going to ask him some really hard questions about the 4-hour work week and the questions that I think you would want to know, you listening, and that everyone that is a fan, I think, is going to get tremendous value out of this. And if you're a critic, I'm going to ask Tim some questions that I think critics would want to hear and know about. So if you're listening to this live, we're recording this right now at this time because his brand new version of the 4-hour work week, the extended version, is being released on the 15th of this month. But we're doing this interview so that we can create a recording that's documented and can be shared with people and listened to over and over again. So if you're listening to this even 2 years from the time we're doing this, I think you're going to get tremendous value out of it. So this is going to be totally new and relevant for many of you, and it's going to be a reinforcement to those of you that are familiar with the 4-hour work week and Tim's also heavily trafficked and read blog at the 4hourblog.com. So Tim Ferriss, welcome. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we've done an interview in the past. It was very, very highly rated. People absolutely love your book. You've changed people's lives. Before I ask you a whole bunch of questions about the 4-hour work week, the expanded and updated new version, which is coming out on December 15th, let me quickly read your bio so that people know who the heck you are. So, Tim Ferriss. Tim is nominated as one of Fast Company's most innovative business people of 2007. He's an angel investor and the author of the #1 New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Business Week bestseller, The 4-Hour Workweek, which has been sold into 35 languages. He's been featured by more than 100 media outlets, including the New York Times, The Economist, Time, Forbes, Fortune, CNN, and CBS. He speaks 6 languages, runs a multinational firm from wireless locations worldwide, and has been a popular guest lecturer at Princeton University since 2003. Where he presents entrepreneurship as a tool for ideal lifestyle design and world change. Tim is also an active education activist and has architected experimental social media campaigns such as Lit Liberation to out-fundraise traditional media figures like Stephen Colbert 3-to-1 at zero cost, building schools overseas and financing more than 15,000 U.S. students in the process. He is on the advisory board of DonorsChoose.org, an educational nonprofit, and winner of Fast Company's 2008 Social Capitalist Awards. Amongst many other things, Tim, you've literally changed the way that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe in the millions of people, from entrepreneurs to housewives to students to people that have worked their entire lives at careers that they despise, and you've given them a whole new way to look at work and to question many of the assumptions that exist in the world. So, what's new since the last time we had the conversation and since the 4-hour work week has been out and since the new version's coming up? Before I get right into questions, anything that you think should be shared so that people should know about you?
Well, it's been a very humbling experience, I think, is the first point I'd like to make. Since the book came out in April 2007, a lot has happened. And principally, the book went from being rejected by 26 out of 27 publishers, which I think is certainly not atypical in the publishing world, with very low expectations from me as well, to where it is now, which was completely unexpected. So the opportunity that's given me over the last 2 years in particular on the blog is the ability to see case studies from Dubai to Berlin to California to the Midwest, and to see the commonalities, what's working, what isn't working. And that was the principal reason for putting together the expanded and revised edition, because there were resources that I had found through my readers that were better than the resources I'd included in the book, and then there were the case studies themselves, many of them with families, which I wanted to include. What has changed is the macroeconomic climate, with the recent events in the stock market, what people are really perceiving as the worst recession since the Great Depression. And I think that has led a lot of people to look for new options. So very unexpectedly, although there are two different camps, there are those people who feel that the principles in the book would not apply now that the economic climate has changed. The sales have actually increased because people are realizing that many of the hypothetical questions that I asked beginning in 2003 at the beginning of my classes, such as, what would you do if you could not retire? If you could not retire, how would your decisions and priorities change? A lot of people are finding themselves in situations where their 401ks have lost 30, 40% or more in paper value. Now, granted, if they didn't sell, they haven't lost anything at this point. But they're starting to look at how they can perhaps redistribute that retirement throughout life and make it more affordable, or just re-examine the concept of retirement altogether. So it's been a real learning experience, and I have learned much more since the book came out in 2007 than I did before putting the book together. So I'd say those are the main milestones and differences between then and now.
Well, the book, when it first came out, the original version, and now this new one, it literally created a tidal wave. It became a giant, huge bestseller. It exceeded most people's expectations. And as you know, I work with some of the top entrepreneurs on the planet, and it just absolutely changed the whole paradigm of how people think about time, how they think about work. And was it because the culture was ready to hear it, or did you present the message in a certain way? Or, what do you think was the cause as to why the 4-Hour Workweek has become so gigantic, and why your blog, which, by the way, is just an awesome blog. You are, I will say this, you're an incredible writer. You have the ability to articulate things in ways that, when I first interviewed you, I said that the 4-Hour Workweek was probably the most profound book on looking at time and how you structure your life and deal with all the giant distractions that I'd read, ever, especially in a decade. And many people feel that way. So you're an incredible writer. However, it's not just your ability to write; it's what you write about. So why do you think it's taken off the way it has? Why has this become such a big thing? You have just literally hundreds of thousands of people that read your blog, the4hourblog.com. And what is it?
I think there are a few things. So I think that there are, as much as I try to be a good writer, there are certainly far better writers than myself. But I do think that there were a few unique circumstances that led to the book doing what it did. The first is quite simply that I was writing the book that I would have wanted as a manual about 4 years earlier. Before I had taken the 2 years around the world and done all these experiments in streamlining and automating the business that I was running, and so forth and so on, applying things to my personal life in Buenos Aires and in Berlin and Japan, etc. And principally, that book was filling a gap that I didn't see. In other words, I went to the bookstore to try to find something that would allow me to both maintain my ambitions, but make better use of time. But my ambition was not to become Jack Welch. I did not want to run a Fortune 500 company. And there was that side of the spectrum, business biographies and so forth. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there were books, usually in a completely different section, that were basically to instruct you on how to completely forego income or become more frugal, refuse the importance of income, and become some type of philosophical monk or vagabond. And while there's value in both of those, there was nothing in the middle ground. I was ambitious, late 20s, well-educated, not that you have to be, and wanted to do big things, but I also wanted to have complete control of my time, realizing that without that time, the income I made had no value, but I didn't want to forego the income. And I had friends in the same position in their 20s and 30s, and I wrote the book speaking to two of them, basically, two of my closest friends, one who was a startup entrepreneur and another who was in investment banking, both of whom had zero time. And I had to do that because I actually wrote and threw out the first 4 chapters that I wrote for the book because I didn't know how to capture my own voice. And I think that's the secret, if there is a secret, to good writing, or at least writing that captures the attention long enough to impart a message. So secondly, I think that with various digital technologies, whether that's BlackBerry, whether it's a gadget or software, or email certainly, people were beginning to realize that the problem of time famine is getting worse, not better, and there's some type of intervention necessary. So I think that I was also timing things inadvertently with the publication of the book, where people were really at a breaking point with many of those issues, and were not sure how to reverse the trend, how to interrupt that progression, that inflation of the email inbox by 5% a week or whatever it might be for people. So I think those are a few of the things that contributed.
Well, I mean, I think you've been more responsible for having people, put together creative autoresponders and how to deal with email and how they check it and when they check it and just everything. I mean, even going into social media and all the things that you write about now, you just literally change people's habits. So the main thing, I'm going to ask you what you've learned since the book has come out. I mean, you've already started talking about some of that stuff, but I'm going to ask you things specifically related to time and to social media and responsibilities that all human beings have, like children and whatnot. But for the most part, since the book has come out and the new version, what is the central message? I mean, what are you really hoping that when someone reads your book, when someone reads your blog, what do you want to have happen to the people? Because everyone listening to us right now obviously is interested in the 4-hour work week. Some believe, this is a bunch of crap. There's no way someone could work, 4 hours. And other people are like, well, if it is possible, I certainly want it. Maybe they want money. Maybe they want a bunch of things. What would you like to have be the benefits and byproducts of people reading your book and your blog?
The real sole objective that I have is to help people to develop the habit of testing assumptions and asking questions of the obvious. And then testing different options. So encouraging people to embrace an experimental lifestyle. What I mean by that, I think the clearest example of that would be, for one point made in sports, related to swimming. So I put together a post on how I learned to swim after 30 years of being absolutely phobic of swimming, and was able to go, and this is not a reflection of my ability at all, I was able to go from 2 laps maximum in a given pool, because my heart rate would jump to 180 beats per minute plus, due to many issues, lung issues, as well as just low body fat, wrestler build, which is essentially caveman, so drowning monkey image, to a 1 kilometer open water swim in the ocean by myself about 3 to 4 weeks later. And that was not from conditioning, it wasn't from training, it was from practicing different biomechanics. And I had the help of 2 other people, Chris Saka and Terry Laughlin, who's the founder of a method called total immersion swimming. But basically what I realized is the assumptions are in swimming. So you ask yourself first, in subject area X, whether that's my career, my job, my family, my sport, so in this case swimming, what are the assumptions? And the assumptions were, you have to kick. Kicking is the main means of propulsion. So here's a kickboard. Kick as hard as you can, do 4 laps. That was always the first thing that swimming coaches would try to teach me, and I would thrash around kicking as hard as I could, and I wouldn't move a damn inch, and I would quit, obviously, as a result of that. So the first thing was, the assumptions are you have to kick. Okay, number 2 is you're swimming on top of the water. You're reaching out as far as you can, you're catching, and then you're pulling to propel yourself. So you're mainly propelling yourself by pulling and kicking, and you're swimming on top of the water. Those were a few of the assumptions. And when you test those, when you ask yourself, do I actually have to kick? Do I have to swim on top of the water? Is pulling the way that I propel myself forward? The answer is pretty much that the opposite approach is the best for most people, meaning that using your kick only to turn your hips so that you can alternate streamline right, streamline left like a fuselage, accepting that because of the density of your body, even if you're doing a crawl or a freestyle stroke, you're going to be 95% submerged. So getting comfortable with being submerged and recognizing that it's normal. And then thirdly, rather than reaching out on top of the water and catching, actually penetrating the water right in front of your head effectively and angling your arms down so they're almost pointed below the surface of the water by like 30 degrees, and focusing on that entry point rather than pulling. was what allowed me that type of practice of different biomechanics to make that progress. And I think that what I want to do with people is, whether they're looking at work or family or taking a trip or anything, starting a business, is to establish the assumptions and the beliefs that they have about what they have to do. And if they're looking at, let's say, options A or B, to try to find a C option. And that is exactly what I want people to do. I don't think I have all the answers. I definitely do not. But I do think I can help people develop better questions so that they can come up with creative solutions.
Yeah, I love that, because your book does pose really fantastic questions and really causes you to really think about what you do and how you live. And one of the things that I've heard constantly from people that have read the 4-Hour Workweek and have embraced it is, I just never really thought of it this way. You kind of hear that a lot. That's an interesting way to think about that. And that's good, because it really challenges people. Now, along with that, you have critics. You have people that say this is nonsense. There's no way that somebody can work a 4-hour work week. So, my question to you is, do you work a 4-hour work week? Do you still do that? I mean, what's Tim's current life like?
So there are definitely critics, plenty of critics, and I think that if we all had the same opinions, it would be a boring world indeed. So I'm thankful to a lot of them for asking good questions. The first thing, and certainly you know this story, so I won't retell it right now, but the original title of the book was actually Drug Dealing for Fun and Profit, for a lot of reasons, principally because it was a tongue-in-cheek reference to a sports nutrition company that I built up to distribution in about 15 countries. That was vetoed by Walmart. I tested about 12 different titles on Google AdWords, and the title with the highest click-through rate was the 4-Hour Workweek. And the reason that title was tested to begin with, it was actually the 2-hour work week when we were brainstorming, because that was the amount of time roughly that I was spending per week running this company when I was in Argentina training for the World Championships in Tango, which is a separate story. And that was deemed unbelievable by a few people that I was talking with, so we compromised at the 4-hour work week. The objective of the book is not to create an idle lifestyle. Never was, never will be. That's discussed at length in a number of chapters, including one called Filling the Void. And the objective is to have control of time, the ability to say no to anything and everything, just about. Obviously, there's some limitations, like family obligations. I mean, you can say no. They wouldn't necessarily be a good idea to say no to. But you always have the option to say no. Number 3, that you get the absolute maximal output for the inputs that you put in. And productivity is nothing more than the ratio of input to output. The better the ratio, the better your productivity. It's not how much you do, because you can sacrifice everything when you do more. So a better way to look at it is that ratio. And that's the reason that I've done work with Google and Microsoft, CIA, etc. I mean, that was the most unusual response to the book. My life right now is, by design, doing what I most want to do. So that means that from a financial standpoint, so if we define work as it's defined in the book, which is something that we want to do less of, or something that we do solely because it's driven by financial motives, then I do spend much less than 4 hours per week on work even now. I'm very active, though. I don't want people to get the idea that I'm sitting on my ass staring at a corner, drooling out of my mouth all day, or sitting on a beach doing the same thing, which gets boring after about 48 hours for most people, which is why type A personalities really can't retire when retirement is looked at as an indefinite rest period. It doesn't work. So my life right now is focused on a number of things, including certainly the book. I'm finishing up another book, which will be my second book, tentatively called Becoming Superhuman. But most of my time is spent either thinking up experiments that I can do on myself to then discuss on the blog, or working right now with educational nonprofits. So I'm very, very active. But spending time on the things that I want to spend time on. And that's ultimately the goal that I have for every person, every reader that I come in contact with, whether that's via the blog or the book.
Great. Well, a lot of things that I've written to ask you about today, some being obstacles and another critics, because I think you have some really good perspective on critics. And just once these assumptions are broken, it opens up lots of opportunities. And I mean, I know a handful of people that have literally developed $1 million businesses that take less than 4 hours a week that have been created as a result of using your book as a roadmap. So people have made, even tremendous amounts of money, and I know that one of the things you say is you don't need to make millions of dollars to live the life. What people really want is the benefits and the byproducts of what they perceive, a million or more dollars will actually make for them. So let's talk about time. I mean, we live in a world where I'm a business owner, and I'm very much a believer in setting things up to be ELF, which is my acronym for easy, lucrative, and fun, versus HAF, which is hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating. And most people don't have an ELF life. They have a HAF life. They have a HAF business. And a lot of that has to do with time. And we are living in a very, very fast-paced world. And you have a lot of unique and valuable perspectives on time. So advice, suggestions on how do people make the most out of their time. I mean, everyone's busy. People are on email, the internet, Facebook, all the different forms of social media, Twitter, you name it. What do they do with it all?
So the first point I'd like to make is something that has become really clear since the book was initially published in 2007. This is something that's become very clear in the last year and a half in particular. And that is that people should think of attention management as much as they think of time management. And that generally results in better decisions than just looking at how to allocate time or how to fill your Outlook calendar or Google Calendar more effectively. And what that means is that if time determines the value of your income, i.e. if you're an investment banker making, let's just say, $250,000 a year, but you work 80 hours a week, your lifestyle output of each dollar will be less than someone who, let's say, makes $60,000 a year but spends half the year on a beach in a beach town in Brazil running their business and then, let's say, selling to clients in the UK, which is actually a person I spoke with last week. Just as that is the case, attention determines the value of your time. So let's just say that you wake up on a Saturday morning, and because you have not planned your weekend, i.e. you don't have any activities to displace work, if you're type A personality, that means that you will work. It means that you will attempt to feel productive rather than bored. This is almost universal truth. So you decide that you're going to check your email for 10 minutes, which if you have tremendous self-control, you may actually keep it to 10 minutes. So do you have time to check email for 10 minutes? Yes, you do. So you check it and you find a problem that you can't address until Monday morning. What that does is it puts you in a state of preoccupation that effectively renders the next 48 hours of so-called free time or recovery time completely useless. And you end up in this middle ground between productivity and relaxation or recovery, if you're type A and need to think of it that way to allow yourself to take it. You end up in the middle where you get neither of those two things. And similarly, there's actually an outstanding article. It's very short. It's a blog post of about 2 pages long by Paul Graham, who is one of the founders of Y Combinator, which is an incubator in Silicon Valley that churns out startups. And he wrote an article called I believe it's the Maker's Schedule and the Manager's Schedule. And the point he makes is that for anyone who is creating, who is producing rather than solely managing other people, they require large chunks of time, 3-4 hour chunks of time at minimum to get started, get warmed up, get their mental state in the right place where they can produce the work that they need to produce. And if they're interrupted, even if it only takes 1 minute, 2 minutes, that can completely reset them so that they get nothing done by the end of the day. Coders, programmers are very famous for saying, I can't even start coding effectively until I've spent an hour in front of the computer screen. So if you have these hour-long chunks of time and you're getting interrupted with a phone call or a short meeting or whatever it might be, for even 5 minutes, that can mean you get nothing done at the end of the day. So setting aside these large blocks of time is very important. And Peter Drucker, the management theorist, wrote a book called The Effective Executive that really underscores this. Also a very worthwhile read. But if you only have 10 minutes and you're in a bookstore, you can pick up The Effective Executive and read a chapter called Know Thy Time. And this is one of the points that he makes very clearly. Another point that Drucker and I both underscore is one that's very counterintuitive, and that is that the most effective executives, and executive to me means someone who is responsible for making decisions. getting things done. So that could be a mother of three, a single mother of three, as a number of case studies that are in the original version of the book. It could be the CEO of a large company. It could be the solo entrepreneur. The most effective executives make very few decisions. And this surprised me. This really surprised me. But over and over again, I've met a number of billionaires who came out of the software industry in the last 2 years, and many uber successful, both in financial and personal terms, entrepreneurs. And they make fewer decisions than the mediocre executive. What I mean by that is every time they encounter a decision or a problem, they will ask themselves, is this a one-time occurrence, or is this something that is likely to happen again? Is it a pattern? Could it be a pattern? Could it come up again? And if the answer is it could come up again, they establish a rule or a policy for dealing with it in the future, and they never have to think about it again. So the most effective executives, I would say people, when they encounter resistance or a problem or an issue or decision, will say, is this likely to happen again? And if the answer is yes, then they decide, this is how I will address this in the future, or this is how someone else will address this in the future. And that does two things. It puts you on autopilot so that you can focus on the most important things, the critical few things, as opposed to the trivial many that will come up if you don't establish policies. And it also gives you a template if you have these rules in place and policies. And that could be something as simple as, which things do I say no to? What are the things that I have to say no to establish constraints so that I can get everything else done? And once you establish that, then you can take that, let's just say it's in a Word document, and pass it to an assistant or someone else, and you can delegate. But you have to become a practitioner of creating policies and not just making many decisions that have to be repeated.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask you about, because I'm just envisioning people that get in themselves in a state, and I'm, of course, have been a victim of my own thinking and activity of this many times in my life and business career. Someone's listening right now, and they're, scatterbrained. They're in areas that life is not under control. They don't have a handle on a lot of things, and many different forms are taking their attention. And I know you outline a whole process in the 4-Hour Work Week, and you've written about this in depth on your blog. When someone's in a bad state, they're just scatterbrained, they don't know how to make a decision, they're totally distracted, they feel completely out of control, and their life is unmanageable, almost at the addictive state. What would you recommend they do first? I mean, how would they take your book as an example and start getting on the path?
So the very first thing I would recommend, and this is something that I still do myself, even if I'm not in that state of overwhelm, because I think it helps prevent that state of overwhelm, is I will do an 80-20 analysis, and I will actually do it any number of 3 ways. The first is if I know what I'm trying to accomplish, and a lot of people, myself included sometimes, are not terribly clear on what they want to accomplish, and that's why they feel overwhelmed. So if I am clear on what my, let's say, most important singular goal is, so what is the one thing, if accomplished, that would be the force multiplier that would make everything else change, that would change my life most dramatically for the positive. So once you figure that out, if you figured it out, then you ask yourself, what are the 20% of activities and the 20% of people who produce the 80% of the results that I want related to this? And that could be profit, for example, and 80% of the positive emotions. So generally speaking, which activities are creating 80% of the results that I want, and which people, the 20%, are producing the emotional states that I want. So figure that out. That's number one. Second is doing exactly the opposite. So what are the 20% of activities that are consuming 80% of my time? And what are the 20% of people who are creating 80% of the negative emotions in my life? And then it becomes as simple as either, once you have that clarity, and that's often enough, focusing on doing only the things in that first list, or simply avoiding the things in the second list. And then thirdly is you can create an 80-20 list for specific projects. if need be. And that could be for, let's say, writing a book. It could be for launching a product. It could be for any number of things. But really looking at the 80-20 breakdown of those three categories. And if I had to add one other exercise, it would be fear setting, which is, for most people, there's something that they are avoiding doing. And that's almost everyone. There's something they're postponing, whether that's an uncomfortable conversation, most often, something that risks rejection, something that is going to be a lot of work no matter what, whatever it might be. They should sit down and establish exactly what the worst case scenarios could be if they did what they're considering doing. So this is referred to as fear setting. And you take a single piece of paper, break it into 3 columns. The first column would be all of the terrible things that could happen if you do what you're considering doing. That could be quitting your job. It could be starting your own company. It could be taking a 4-month mini retirement to Berlin or someplace like that, or Japan, who knows. So all the worst things that could happen. The second column is the things you could do to prevent those things from happening. And then the third column is what you would do to get back to where you are now if those things happen. And you just go line by line and address it. And once you do that, you realize most things really only present a possibility for transient pain, and many of them offer the potential for permanent or semi-permanent positive changes. And once you see that very clearly on paper, you don't have to talk yourself into doing anything. You don't have to motivate yourself to do it. It just becomes very, very crystal clear that the action that you've been postponing is exactly what you should do and that the risk is minimal. So those would be the 2 steps that I think are most important if you're in a state of overwhelm, is to take a step back, stop putting out fires, stop reacting to email like ping pong, and do an 80-20 analysis and also do the fear setting.
That's fantastic. That's great. I think if people actually went through that process, I mean, I sat here and scribbled down notes. I'm going to absolutely apply that. And you write about this in depth in the new book and in various places in your blog?
I do. And I think that the best way to illustrate this is with real life examples, because theoretically it all sounds good, but for most people, and this includes me, at least me more so before 2004, if someone suggested checking email twice a day or doing any number of things that I suggest in the book, that's absolutely impossible. There's no way I could do that given the boss I have. There's no way I could do that given that I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. Whatever the responsibilities might be that lead you to believe something is impossible. If someone presents a theoretical framework, it's all fine and well, but in the new book there are dozens of examples of people who have tested some of these fundamental fear-based assumptions and have actually made it work. So I think that's exceptionally important for people to see. And they also point out, what was hard and what wasn't, because I think that telling someone everything's going to be easy and all right is the worst thing you could do. This is true in marathons and ultramarathons as well. Like, that's how people break down and quit. But by telling them you're going to do this, this, and this, you're going to experience this fear, you're going to have pain at this point, and then you're going to have this challenge, and then you'll be fine. If they expect it, counterintuitively, it actually helps them to get through it.
You just said something really interesting, that if you tell people it's going to be all right, that what could cause them to quit. Expand on that, because I think that's really interesting. A lot of people, I think more than anything, what the 4-hour work week does is it's a gigantic wake-up call. And not only does it have strategies and ways to obviously be more productive and learn how to make money. I mean, you even described the marketing that you use for the 4-hour work week in the book and all kinds of replicable things. But more than anything, you also bring to light, and I think this is where maybe your critics come from, is that you make people painfully aware that they may be leading insanely quiet but horrible lives of desperation, and that they have painted themselves into a corner and they're absolutely trapped. And so you give people an escape hatch, but along with it comes challenging assumptions, maybe dropping people that are toxic to you, and literally quit doing things that are wasting your life, pretending that someday you're going to win the lottery or something. So talk more about what you just said. That's interesting to me. So
one of my role models in many respects is Yvon Chouinard. I'm sure I'm mangling the pronunciation. The founder of Patagonia, not the country, but not the place, but the company, the clothing company. And one quote of his, and I'm paraphrasing here, is there's no difference between the pessimist who says, don't bother, you can't change anything, and the optimist who says, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. In both cases, nothing gets done. And it's a disservice, I think, in many cases, to tell people what they want to hear, even though you feel like that will enable them to get to the next step, which is true, but they'll get from A to B, and then they'll quit. They won't get to the objective, which let's just say is Z. The better approach is to tell them what they need to hear, and there are different ways to deliver that, but one of the ways that I do that in the book, and it's not always pleasant for people, is to point out that many of the terms and concepts that we use that our lives revolve around, like retirement, like success, I just want to be successful, or I just want to, I'll retire at age 40, or I just want to take my business to the next level. The next level is another term that is in this group of terms and concepts that are very, very poorly defined. And if I were to ask someone, like, how are you going to know when you're at the next level? What then? Or how are you going to know when you're successful? What then? What are you going to do in retirement? What are the activities and interests that are going to replace what you're doing right now, which is, say, looking at your BlackBerry computer for 15 hours a day? What is it that's going to replace that? And the answer for most people in the latter question is, I don't know. I have no idea. And that's why I tell people who are in that position, I encourage them to take, mini retirement of at least 4 weeks, which is important because you can really just basically do damage control remotely, acting as a remote control CEO for 2 weeks. You can still work on the office for that period of time. Generally, it takes at least 4 weeks for someone to create enough distance from themselves and their routine to look at things semi-objectively and to reset. But if they do that, they'll generally find that they have a semi-nervous breakdown, which is not the objective, but it's an intermediate point. They have a semi-nervous breakdown or an actual nervous breakdown because they realize that all of their outside interests have atrophied to the point that they don't really know what to do with themselves if they're not working. It's a scary place to be, but it's better to have that experience now, which then gives you the ability to correct it quite easily after the fact, rather than working for the next 20, 30 years following a long-term career plan that's predicated on retiring and then redeeming all the time that you've spent in the office, which is a very dangerous gamble. So that's an expansion of what I meant. But I do think it's important to give people what they need, whether that's selling them what they want and then giving them what they need, or just telling them what they need but doing it in a very tactful way where you lead them from one step to the logical next step.
The reason I bring that up is what it struck for me is that I have a dear friend who, when we first met almost a decade ago, her very awesome and close brother, who she loved dearly and was in incredibly great health, died accidentally, had a seizure and died. And one of the ways that we bonded so well is that, she had said to me several years later that you were the only person, Joe, that was not coming up to me and say, everything's going to be okay, and trying to give me a pep talk. You would come up to me and say, what are you going to do? And you presented things in a way that just simply made me take responsibility and get through the grief and just get on with my life. And that I never even thought about that. It's just that I had been through, both my parents have died. I've had very close friends die. I've had some, things that caused me, I don't know where, but it's been life experience that has caused me to realize that, you can't always pep talk your way through everything. Sometimes you just gotta work through the pain. And there's a quote, I can't remember I think it's Oscar Wilde, that says, if you're going through hell, keep going. And there are situations where you got to do it. And I mean, if you want to give any case examples for anything you're saying, by all means, please do it. I mean, I know this to be true. There was earlier this year, I had spent a month out of the country. I went to Vietnam for 9 days. We were together. I also went to Galapagos Island for another 10 days, and in between that time, I literally went an entire month without checking email more than twice, an entire month. And I run a multi-million-dollar business and have a lot of people that are doing stuff. But had it not been for two things. One, my friend Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, and his thinking and training and mentoring and coaching me over the years. And the 4-hour work week with this whole looking at email, I never in a million years would have thought that was even a possibility. And it took me a while to even come to that. But the reality is people have way more capability and power than they could even imagine. And I think that's one of the beauties of what the 4-hour work week is and what it lays out, which is why I'm looking so forward to totally going through the new version and just seeing what you've come up with. But do you have any case studies that would totally, give an example of the validation of what you're saying here?
I think there are a few, and I'd also like to make a point. In the last year, for me, a number of things that have happened that have just underscored the importance of not betting on a redeemable point in time for lost hours and years in the present tense. So, in other words, sacrificing hours in your prime of health to then redeem it in what will arguably be your absolute low point in physical health. One of my friends died of pancreatic cancer, 32. Another friend of mine went to his doctor for a routine checkup and was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and about 3 days later had to have one of his testicles removed. And these are both, he's also, I think, 31. And actually put together a presentation which you can find online. It's not paid, it's free. It's called, I think it was Practical Pessimism, using Stoic philosophy as a productivity system, and really becoming comfortable with the things that you fear, in other words, death and so forth, so that you can make absolute best use of your time now and not emotionally overreact to fear so that you postpone things. But in terms of case studies, there are quite a few that I think illustrate what can be possible in a very short period of time. So two that come to mind right off the bat, and these are I use these two examples because they're with physical products, which actually makes them more difficult in many respects than using simply digital products, which is certainly another option. Well, the first is actually neither of those two examples. The first is a gentleman I spoke to who had a company on top of the Inc. 500 list, one of the fastest growing 500 privately held companies in the United States. And he was continuing to run the business and to take it to the next level for both employees, founders, himself, investors. And he was miserable. He was totally miserable, but he felt chained to this beast, to this monster that he had to continue to feed. And he completely sold the company, took himself out of it, and he said, for the first time in 20 years, I'm absolutely loving my life. And he did not hold out to get the best price possible. He took a very reasonable but strong offer that would enable him to do the things he wanted to do and have the things he wanted to have. And he made that decision that most people never make. And I think that there's a real danger to postponing that most people have not experienced personally. But one reader who quit her job and set up a muse that's giving her about the same level of income that she had before, but she's able to travel around the world and obviously get much more lifestyle output from that. She said, I'm doing what I wish my father could have done. Her father worked for Levi Strauss until he was in his 60s, had a long list of things he planned for retirement. He retired and then within a month had died of a heart attack. And those are the types of stories that I like to really underscore for people. But in terms of two case studies of people who've made things work, and these are not in the book, one is a reader who not too long ago was relatively unknown, but knew a lot about baseball swings. Okay, so he knew a lot about the mechanics of the baseball swing, but had not had really any degree of exposure whatsoever. He created a site called Swing Mechanic. It's just swingmechanic.com. Develops both products for training people for better baseball swing biomechanics, and also does coaching. And using the book, he actually sent me an email that I'm hoping to reproduce at some point, but he said, first I did this, which enabled him to speak at this baseball conference and get in front of a lot of the Major League Baseball instructors and coaches and so forth nationwide. And he's like, this is the chapter that I used to do that. expert builder. I think it was the expert builder sidebar. And then he said, the next step is I did this, and got him his first 1 or 2 Major League Baseball clients. And then he sent me a PDF of an article in ESPN magazine, basically describing him as one of the top, baseball swing coaches for Major League Baseball players in the United States. And the guy's just kicking ass. I mean, he can do whatever he wants now. Absolutely whatever he wants. He has more than enough income. He has more than enough time. And he followed it step by step through the book to establish these various different pieces, not only of the business, but of his own lifestyle design, with the parameters, what he would do, what he wouldn't do, becoming aware of addiction to growth and other things so that he could control it. That's an example that I just love because it's also close and dear to my heart in performance improvement. Second example, very different, but also just shows you how niche you can go while still creating more than enough income to do whatever you want to do. Because most people overestimate what they need to, quote, retire. So you take the list of things that you want to do and have in retirement. So I want to Aston Martin DB9, I want to go to Aspen to ski once a year, I want to have a house in France, chateau in France, whatever it might be. When you actually sit down and cost those things out, when you look at the pricing, and let's just say it's something that you can amortize over a year or years, whatever it might be, when you add it all up, unless it's something really exorbitant, and none of the examples I just gave are, you generally find that if you're in the right place, you can make that work on $50,000 to $100,000 a year. Very seldom do you not find that to be the case. And so the next example is a very young guy who put together a DVD called Guerrilla Drum Making. So Guerrilla, Guerrilla Drum Making. I think it's just guerrilladrummaking.com. So one DVD rather, that shows how to make your own drum set, how to make your own 5-piece drum set, customized 5-piece drum set if you have a hand drill. Basically, you don't need to be a woodworker, you don't need to know anything about construction, you can have 2 left hands, but this shows you how to create your own customized drum set. And he's either tripled or quadrupled his income, and he has all the time in the world. I mean, he put in the production, and which cost a few $1,000s total, which he was able to. There are a million different ways to get that. And he is free. He's absolutely free to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And it's a single DVD that he put together based on his passion, which was drum making. And in his letter to me, he said, "I didn't have to compromise shit." That was his his one-liner after he said, "I expected that I was going to have to do this. I'd have to do that. I'd have to make all these compromises in order to get to where I wanted to be." And he said, "I did not have to compromise a goddamn thing." I think those are 2 really fun examples of what readers have done, and there are dozens of other ones in the book.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And the point is, people can come up with a lot of excuses, and they always will. It's when people are willing to put that, to create instead of complain. And I think that's really the roadmap that the 4-hour work week can be if you utilize it for that. So obstacles, mistakes, things that get in people's way of actually living this sort of life, if it's really about a 4-hour work week, or let's say someone's insane and is working 80 to 100 to 120 hours a week. They hardly ever sleep. And they feel overly responsible to everything. They have children, single mothers. There's all kinds of obstacles that could exist, and different people have different challenges than others. I'd like your advice and suggestions for all the listeners on how to not only look at obstacles, but how to overcome them. What are some of the common things that you hear, and what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when trying to implement the 4-hour work week strategies?
The first missing ingredient, I would say, or missing practice that I see most often is the exercise of telescoping. What I mean by that is being able to look at your behaviors now and telescope out 1 year, 5 years, 10 years to see where you will be if you continue with your current set of behaviors. And this became really clear to me. This is actually just before, for those people who aren't aware, I left the U.S. in mid-2004 on what was supposed to be a 4-week trip to London to basically redesign my business or shut it down. and then continued that trip around the world pretty much with no end date for about 16 months or so. Before I took that trip, there were two catalysts. One was a long-term girlfriend, closest I've come to getting married, breaking up with me and giving me a plaque, not a letter, but a Dear John plaque that said business hours end at 5 p.m. and encouraging me to keep it on my desk. That was one. The other was going to an industry conference for sports nutrition and nutraceuticals and so forth, and going up to one of the most respected guys in the business that I had some contact with in the past, and I had asked him if he could spend 15 minutes explaining wholesale strategy and so forth for growing my business. And I sat down with him, and he was obviously visibly just a wreck. I mean, he hadn't been sleeping, something was wrong, and I found out that he was just about to have his second divorce. And so here's this guy, from all outward signs, financially, he's at the pinnacle of this business, at a high level position, one of the most highly esteemed companies, and it was all for naught. I mean, it was just an absolutely disaster scene from the personal standpoint, and that led me to telescope out, and I said, wow, if this guy's teaching me what I need to do to get to, quote, the next level, and he's done that himself, and this is where he is this really a model that I want to emulate? And the answer was, of course, no. And I think for many people, whether they have kids or a mortgage or whatever it might be, if they look at their own work behaviors and they say, well, I can't stop checking my email every 5 minutes, the question they should ask is, what is my life going to look like 5 years from now if I continue with this behavior? Is it going to get better or is it going to get worse? Let's assume, rightly so, that it will get worse if you don't put in some type of corrective action, so you're checking email every 2 minutes. Where does that end? And where do you end up in 5 years? Where you end up in 5 years, let's just say that the reasoning you have is, I can't stop checking my email every 5 minutes because I have these bills to pay and I take care of my family. Well, what's most likely to happen is that because of the way that you, by default, end up neglecting your family, you may not have your family with you 5 years from now. So the ability to telescope out, I think, is extremely important. The other issue that people have, if, let's just say they successfully telescope out or realize I need to change something needs to change, is they experiment with large steps instead of small steps. So what I mean by that is, let's just take the case of virtual assistants. The biggest mistake that people make with virtual assistants is, number one, assuming if they have problems in the beginning that it's a problem with a virtual assistant and not with themselves. So generally, the problem is, this is actually a term used in customer service, for tech customer service, picnic. It's problem in chair, not in computer. What that means is, it's usually that the person who's hiring a virtual assistant, even if it's for $30 a month or $2 an hour, is not accustomed to giving orders. They're accustomed to receiving orders, and it takes practice to learn that. So the biggest mistake they make, assuming that there are going to be some learning pains, which there will, is you don't want to take, let's just say, a critical work assignment for doing competitive research or putting together some important presentation and then send that to Bangalore, India as the first attempt at doing something with a virtual assistant. You wouldn't do that if you hired someone in the U.S., and you shouldn't do it when you're using a virtual assistant. So there are two suggestions there. Number one is reading an article called Zero Defect Hiring. It's a zero-defect hiring, which is, I believe, published by Harvard Business Press. It's an excerpt from a book. Just the single best article I've ever read on hiring and avoiding bad hires. That is extremely important. Number two is starting with small things, and those can be ridiculous things. So what's important is getting comfortable with delegation, first and foremost, not creating incredible business results from that delegation. What I mean by that is, it can be worth it to use a company like Ask Sunday, so just asksunday.com, to, let's just say, as a joke, to set up lunch appointments with some of your close friends using a person in like Bangalore or the Philippines. It's freaking hysterical. Do that, or hire someone on Craigslist for $15 an hour to pick up your laundry and go grocery shopping for you. Something like that. And again, the question isn't, do I have the time? It's, do I have the attention? So people view little things like grocery shopping, picking up dry cleaning, etc. If you're busy enough, they view those things as just small, half-hour expeditions, but the interruptive cost is so much greater than that 30 minutes. It's amazing what you can do if you just allocate, and this is what I encourage people to do, allocate a $250 or $100 experimental budget. That is your lifestyle experimental fund. And then apply it to doing these tiny experiments with, in this case, personal outsourcing. But do not make your first trials with something that is important. That is the surest way to fail. And those would be a few of my suggestions. And then the other is just as people become, in some cases, obsessed with doing more and more and more and more, people can also overly obsess on doing less and less and less and less, and that's not the objective. The objective is not to work less. The objective is to live more, and those are two very, very distinct things. If your sole objective is removing things, you just end up with this void, and that void can put you into a very dangerous, depressive existential state. A void is not what we're after. So we're trying to add more of the good, not just subtract all of the bad. Those would be a few of the things that I've observed and some of the things that people can do to correct them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love the objective is not to work less, but to live more. I mean, if people could just really brand that into their thinking, I think it would be huge. Let's talk about social media and the internet and the distractibility. I think it way goes beyond a choice for many people. I think it's a full-blown addiction, and I think a lot of people don't create activities by choice. Their behavior is driven by compulsion, and we have all of these things that can become very compulsive to the point of becoming unmanageable and literally may need 12-step intervention. What are your thoughts on the fast pace, as our good friend Dr. Edward Hallowell, who is the top ADD/ADHD psychiatrist in the world and the author of a book called Crazy Busy, he came up with that term, crazy busy. We're no longer just in a busy world, we're in a crazy busy world for most people, and they spend time screen sucking and not being able to pull away from it. So how do you handle it? Because I know you utilize it, you just don't let it use you.
Yeah, so there are a few things I would say. Number one is that business is very much like fashion in the sense that things come and go. There are a lot of fads. And the difference is, instead of just spending money and wearing clothing, the cost is time, in some cases a lot of time. So if you're looking at social media, and I'm speaking obviously as an investor in Twitter, I'm biased on some level, but I used to be a huge critic of Twitter. I do think there are some exceptional uses of it, but if you personally, there are two things. If you personally cannot measure the effect that Twitter has on your business, quantitatively, then if you don't enjoy using it, you shouldn't use it. So, side note, if you're wasting time but enjoying it, you're not wasting time. However, it doesn't mean you're being productive. Okay, so we can distinguish between let's just say recreational use of social media and business use. We're going to talk about business use. Like, if you want to use it in your spare time and you enjoy it, awesome. Doesn't mean you're being productive, but the goal of recreation is not necessarily to be productive. But in business cases, if you cannot measure it, then I'm of the opinion that you should not use it. And that goes for any tool. That goes for any business practice. It goes for any type of advertising. And I know you and I are very much on the same page there. I'm not a big believer, for most people, in brand image advertising, where it's like, we're just going for exposure. Exposure, okay, well, what do you get from the exposure? Well, it's exposure. That's not an acceptable answer. For people who have finite amounts of time at their disposal, for people, especially the solo entrepreneur, let's just say, or small business owner who does not have, let's just say, Madison Avenue ad agency at their disposal, who can run around wasting time and money and it doesn't hurt anybody, you need to be able to measure the outcomes. And I mean, there are some tools that will help you do that. I'm involved with StumbleUpon, and one of the tools that I've developed with them is called Super, SU.PR, and that allows you to track. That basically gave me the tools that I wanted to use as it relates to Twitter. So you can post directly to Facebook and Twitter, and simultaneously, so you don't have to manage both of them. And then what it does is it gives you all your statistics. It tells you which were most clicked on. All right, so I use Twitter, among other things, for testing. I think it's very valuable for testing, and if you know the click-through rates, then you can test headlines and so forth very effectively. So I can see the click-through rates. I can also see people who retweet. So the people who are most influential, who are spreading my messages or links or headlines, I can identify those people, which has tremendous value. That does have tremendous direct value because I can identify the people with the largest audiences who are most interested in the subject matter that I'm discussing, are most interested in me. But if you cannot do that, then I encourage people to ask themselves, not only can I measure it, but if I can measure it, is this the best use of my time? Do I already have an extremely well-established direct mail business that, for the time being, gives me better dollars of profit per hour spent ratio, if that's the case, or a better, let's just say, revenue per employee ratio, then they should focus on that. It means they can still experiment with things like Twitter, but I would track them very, very carefully. Secondly is setting thresholds. So I don't, as you know, I don't have an iPhone or a BlackBerry. I find that it is easier to control environment and to prevent bad behaviors or self-defeating behaviors than it is to control behavior, in the sense that whenever you depend on willpower, there is a risk of failure. So if I have dark chocolates in my house anywhere, I might have just one or two pieces a day for 1 or 2 days, and then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to eat the entire box. I know that's going to happen, so I remove that from my house. That's also why I don't have an iPhone or a BlackBerry. I might have self-control, but it certainly will not be the case all of the time, not even most of the time. So for me, I do not use, as a specific example, I do not use a desktop client for Twitter. I don't use TweetDeck or anything like that because it'll make it easier for me to use Twitter, and I want it to be mildly inconvenient so that when I do use it, I have to think, even if that just means going to the website and typing things in, it forces me to deliberate why I'm there and what I'm doing. Secondly is you can use a tool. There's several of them out there. I use one called Rescue Time. So rescuetime.com will allow you to not only track your time and see where you're spending your time, both on software and online, but it will also allow you to block certain sites for certain periods of time. So, checking Facebook, if you have to address that addiction and get your fix, is fine, but you don't want to be doing it every 20 minutes, nor with Twitter every 20 minutes to self-interrupt. If you're going to do that, then set aside blocks of time when you're able to use those sites and no others. And again, rather than relying on willpower, I like to set a program so that it's virtually impossible to use those sites for set periods of time. And secondly is batching any type of repetitive behavior. So let's just say that you're going on Twitter. You've established that Twitter is valuable to use, which I think it can be. So you're going on, every hour or few hours or few minutes for many people and tweeting things out. If they're not of time-sensitive nature, use a program like Super, the su.pr, to schedule those tweets. That's something that I do very often. If I have 3 or 4 different links or announcements or useful things, useful resources that I found, I will schedule those to go out rather than having to go back to Twitter 4 or 5 times, which is also very important. So those are a few points, but don't mimic or ape behavior in the business world, because there's a very heavy price to be paid for a cheery consensus, as Warren Buffett would say. And generally speaking, the most popular way of doing something is not the best way of doing something.
I love the mimic or ape the business world as such. If people could just get that analogy in their head, like a bunch of mindless primates running around doing what everyone else is doing, which in reality, that's pretty much one of the biggest problems that I think exists, is people just look, it's like the blind and dumb leading the blind and dumb leading the blind and dumb, if you don't ever question these assumptions.
Well, and also, just to add something, it can also be the extremely intelligent leading the extremely intelligent leading the extremely intelligent. But each person downstream is just assuming that someone smart up the chain somewhere who led them to use a certain tool did the due diligence and asked the questions to test assumptions, and when you get down to it, none of them did. So, I think it's entirely possible and likely in many cases that there are some really smart people following the advice of other smart people who are following the advice of other smart people to use a certain tool or adopt a certain behavior. But just because they're smart doesn't mean they question the obvious. And in fact, I think that really smart people oftentimes are less likely to question the obvious because they find it almost insulting that they would miss something so clear.
Yeah, you know, and you said so many great things in that, you know, little list of suggestions that you gave there that really incredible. And it reminds me of a couple things. For one, you know, there are people that live like this. You know, I always talk about my good friend Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach.
Yeah, Dan's a very smart guy.
Yeah. You know, he takes 155 free days a year. I've spent lots of time with the guy. No cell phone, no email. You know, I mean, he lives exactly the way he wants to live and runs a very, very profitable business that makes massive contributions to the world. Peter Drucker had this great line, which is, "There's nothing more useless than doing really well that which need not be done at all." And there's a lot of people that are out there doing things really well, but they don't really question, is this even needed? Is it producing anything in my life, from money to joy to results on any level? And, you know, what you just said causes people to actually question that. I love your comment about it's easier to control an environment than behavior. I mean, you know, our friend, which you know him, Bill Phillips, who wrote Body for Life, you know, he's told me that when he'll go to hotels and stuff, he'll ask them to remove things out of the mini bar, from, you know, candy bars to chips to alcohol to whatever, because he doesn't even want the temptation. So
yeah, and guys, just to put that in perspective, if you're not aware, like, Bill Phillips did write Body for Life, but he also had arguably the largest exit in the history of sports nutrition and nutraceuticals. I mean, you can probably tell me, but EAS, what was it, $300 million? $300 million exit. So if someone who can build a company of that scale, which obviously takes a lot of willpower and control, is asking to have things removed from the minibar at the hotel, you shouldn't feel weak for asking to do something similar.
Exactly. You know, that's the whole point. And that's what I want to make clear to everyone, is that no matter what level someone's at, even if you think they're the top in the world, human beings have challenges, and they come up with ways that are effective to handle them. And what I think the 4-hour work week is, and everything you write about on your blog, is a constant amount of processes and life lessons that allow people to manage time, money, energy, and their attention in ways completely different than what hardly anyone else is even writing about, let alone instructing. And so that's why I think it's so valuable. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, have this conversation with you for everyone to listen to. Last thing I'm going to ask you, and then we'll wrap up. Children and other responsibilities that people have, how do they deal with them in the process of, you know, I mean, there's a lot of people that are real busy. I mean, and they can't even envision that, how do I make this work? I work a full-time job. I have, you know, X number of children. What do you say to those people?
What I would say to those people, there are a number of things that I would comment on. The first is that I am the guide, so to speak, through this book or on the blog, but primarily, especially in this updated edition, I'm looking at case studies. I'm looking at people who have tested and implemented things and examining what worked and what didn't. And in most cases, the vast majority are middle class with children. That is the profile, because I think that is, for many people, the most challenging profile. And when you look at the people who have tested these, done small experiments and tested various concepts to see what works for them and what doesn't work for them, there are two things. The first is that the unanimous feedback is, I used to think that I couldn't do these things because I had children, let's just say, as one example, and I've realized that the absolute best reason to do these things is because I have children, i.e., like, I don't want to miss my kids growing up. I don't want to miss their entire childhood. I don't want to be some disassociated father or mother because I was spending all my time at the office. I want to show my kids other cultures. I want to take them around the world, educate them. And all of those things can only happen if I make certain changes. And that does not require a lot of money. Now, on the flip side, I think another reason that people will often look at responsibilities they have, like a mortgage or whatever it might have been, and not take the steps necessary is because they're thinking, again, of the experiments and tests as large changes, and they don't need to be large changes. In other words, for many people, they don't have the desire to get to a 4-hour work week. They don't have the desire to relocate to Brazil or Japan or God knows where, like I do. I mean, not everybody's a lunatic like I am, although there are a lot of them. Maybe all they want to do is scale back from 80 hours a week to 40 hours a week. I mean, for most people, that change is going to be more dramatic than people who go from 40 hours to 4 hours a week. Because at 60, 70, 80 hours a week, most people have very little time for anything else other than work. So if they can simply remove work in the evenings and on the weekends, let's just say, as a first step, the change in quality of life will be so dramatic that the before and afters look almost nothing like one another. So I think that is also something that is important to keep in mind, is that the tools are tools, and the concepts are concepts, the options are options. The degree to which people apply them and how they apply them is completely individual. And I think there's a great example in Tim Draper, who's a very famous venture capitalist and financier in Silicon Valley, who's was one of the backers of Hotmail, among other things. And he provided a quote for the book, but the idea of a 4-hour work week to him is just anathema to his existence. I mean, the idea it's not something that appeals to him at all. I mean, the guy loves what he does and he loves working. And so I'm looking at his quote here, which is, with this kind of time management and focus on the important things in life, people should be able to get 15 times as much done in a normal work week. So for him, what it means is not reducing the amount of time in the office, but actually just improving the output 15x for the time that he is in the office. So it's really a toolbox for people, and how they choose to apply it can be conservative, or it can be totally radical and wild. It can be small, tiny scale with still large output and impact, or it can be on just a massive, complete restart, rehaul. But that is up to the individual.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, and that's kind of the way that I look at it too. I mean, the 4-hour work week to me represents a better use of my time, productivity, clarity on what's important and what's not important. There's a great quote in there. I don't know who wrote it. You have it quoted in there that says, profit is only useful to the degree that you can use it. And, extra time is only useful to the degree that you can enjoy it and have experiences, and be it make money or whatever. What you just said about children and other responsibilities, being the best reason to do things or not do them. And I want to reiterate that too, is if, what we've talked about here, if you're at all, wavering or questioning why adopt and put into action what you've suggested during our conversation here, or what is written on your blog and in your book, The 4-Hour Work Week, think about what's important to you. Think about the people and how much impact will your life have on them if you can get some areas handled or better under control and free up the time and attention to give it to the people that are the most important. Some of the things, Tim, I want to kind of summarize some of the notes that I took based on our conversation here. We talked about attention is more important than time. And I'm going over my notes here. The question isn't whether you have the time, it's whether you can afford the interruptions. That internet, social media, that various things can be all-consuming if you let them, so you need to measure them to see what they're producing. You gave some great websites and suggestions on how to actually do it and what you do. Mistakes that people make, starting big, not testing assumptions, not making their mini retirements. Did you say at least 4 weeks for a mini retirement?
Right. So a mistake is choosing, let's just say, a 1 or 2 week vacation, which is really just catching your breath while you continue the same behaviors, making it at least 4 weeks so you can actually gain the perspective and the interruption of your own routine to change things.
The 80-20 analysis I thought was fantastic. If you're overwhelmed and you're not clear on what you want to accomplish, think about what would be the force multiplier. What are the 20% of people and activities that are producing the results, and then doing the reverse opposite of it. You talked about fear setting, things that people are postponing. I thought telescoping was an amazing way of looking at, where will you be 5 years out or whatever period of time if you continue with your behavior. You talked about an ex-girlfriend that gave you a plaque that says business ends at 5 p.m. For some reason, I wrote that down. I thought that was a clever way to remind people of what the hell are they actually doing with their time. You talked about the objective is not to work less, it's to live more. You talked about it's easier to control the environment than behavior. And then batching repetitive behavior. And you gave some awesome case studies. So, we really covered a tremendous amount of stuff. And I know that there's so much. And I know although you built it up to a 4-hour work week, I know the 4-hour work week is the accumulation of some serious levels of suffering in your life that got you clearly in touch with the pain needed in order to give people a roadmap, a life design process for what you call the new rich. And I think your book has changed so many countless thousands of lives as a result. I think you're doing amazing, great work in the world. And the new revised edition of the 4-Hour Work Week is being released. I would recommend everyone get a copy. And also read Tim's blog at the4hourblog.com. So having said all that, Tim, I'll leave the final words up to you, and then actually any final thoughts, and then I might make one more reiteration regarding the book.
No, I appreciate that, Joe. And what I would say to people is, again, start small. Start really small. Get an idea of what is possible by looking at what other people have done. A good way of doing that is to go to the blog. There's no cost at 4hourblog, F-O-U-R, 4hourblog.com. Look at case studies. There's a category called case studies. You can also look at whether it's travel. There's also a category that looks at examples of families that have been able to take extended world travel. Look at some of what's possible, and start to consider the options that you may have completely ruled out or not even considered as possible up to this point. And then start small. That's all I would say. I really, really hope that people, even if they don't get the book, can at least start to question some of the assumptions that are really the bottlenecks for their lives and preventing them from having the types of experiences they want to have, and preventing the people that they might care for from having the types of experiences they want to have.
Awesome. It's always a pleasure doing the Genius Network conversation with you. The reason I call it a Genius Network is because you want to have a network of Genius Network for me is the marketing term, but it's really a wisdom network, and it's great to take someone that has really developed and looked at the way the world works and has come up with ways to make most people's lives work tremendously better if they're willing to question assumptions. And there's tremendous wisdom in what you shared today. So for everyone listening to us live, I hope you got tremendous value, and I hope you go out right now and really do an 80-20 analysis on yourself. I think the rest of your week will be dramatically improved, and your clarity will become instantaneously better, and your overwhelm will dramatically lessen. Get a copy of Tim's book, The 4-Hour Work Week. I can assure you he's a guy that doesn't try to sell anything on his website, which is amazing. People always question that. He's just putting out really good stuff, and his blog is one of the most popular blogs in the world. And if you've never read it, go read it. It will blow your mind. It's 4hourblog.com. I'm not getting paid anything to say this. I just very much like what Tim is putting out to the world, and wanted to do my part in order to capture some of your wisdom, Tim. And where can they get your book? Pretty much everywhere?
Yep, they'll be able to get it anywhere. I'd say Amazon is probably the surest bet at this point. It usually is. Awesome.
Well, hey, dude, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. And you can post comments on Tim's blog also, so check it out. And we wish everyone a much better, more amazing life journey. And the 4-Hour Work Week will help you accomplish that if you do it. Take care. Hello, this is Joe Polish. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this interview. I hope you found it very useful. Please give me your feedback on all of the interviews that you listen to. I'd love to hear your feedback so we can always deliver a great program for you. Our website is www.joepolish.com, and we also have a Joe Polish Recommends section, so you can take a lot of the ideas and concepts that you hear on my Genius Network interview series and apply them to your business and find vendors and resources. You can go to joepolish.com to find that information and click on the Joe Polish Recommends section.
And also, if you would like to find out about more interviews and invest in more useful Genius Network series interviews, go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks, and eat your competition alive.